G'day viewers, in this episode we have pulled together all of our derivations and analyses with respect to Bob Lazar Sports Model. That is, we close the book on the sports model. What you're going to see is our final scientific position relating to some of its key operation elements. Of course, room exists for additional scientific critique, but in the absence of experimental confirmation of a stable element 115 isotope, further analysis would be wasted effort. Needless to say, this episode scientifically confirms key parts of the Lazar story. However, if you do not have a scientific background and you have already decided that the Lazar story is fake due to a court ruling or some other superficial artifact, then we cannot help you. In order to educate you, we need you to have a scientific background or to be seeking reassurance. As I have already alluded to, the absence of a scientific background places you at a distinct disadvantage if you are already a naysayer regarding the Lazar story. You need to keep in mind that we have effectively solved the same problem twice, in two separate ways, which align perfectly with each other. We have derived the gravity A wave fundamental frequency from first principles, that is, from particle physics, then applied it to calculate the gravity B wave frequency of the Earth, as stated by Bob Lazar. We have also utilised the same equation to calculate the dimensions of the element 115 reactor and waveguide assembly associated with the sports model. Consequently, we have validated Potter's solution to the same problem. Moreover, by assuming Potter's dimensional solution to be exact, we were able to confirm our prediction for the existence of a stable isotope of element 115 with an atomic weight of 296. If you've been a regular viewer of this channel, you'll know that we openly provide all solution pathways with full disclosure on how everything was derived. We do not hide anything. Perhaps this point only resonates with people from a scientific background, but it should resonate with everyone. It's very easy to make a claim and not to show evidence, but it is another matter entirely to provide step-by-step evidence as we do. You can verify all of our evidence for yourself. All you need is a bit of a scientific background to do it. My point being that you can acquire these skills if you wish. They are not exclusive to us. I would like to emphasise that the content on our channel is substantially greater than just the Bob Lazar playlist. We have numerous playlists and we encourage everyone to view them all. For example, if you want to completely understand why Bob Lazar's story is true, you need to watch all of the videos on our channel, in sequential order, starting from episode 1. Anyway, moving on. We stress that the contents of this episode are purely conjecture, the conclusions presented may be incorrect, so viewer discretion is advised. Okay, let's get into the meat and potatoes.
Many people are not aware that the single most important claim Bob Lazar has ever made is his gravity B wave frequency value of 7.46 Hz. Apparently, Bob was given this value by his S4 work colleague, a gentleman named Barry. In reality, it doesn't matter where Bob obtained this value. What matters is that it was stated as fact by Bob Lazar. What we do know for certain is that this value is a mystery to standard physics. At least it was until 2006. In 2006, Storti and Desiato derived and published the mathematical construct capable of generating this value. However, it should be emphasised that this Storti and Desiato technique was never applied to the Lazar story until 2019. Extremely importantly, as you can see from the Storti value of 7.43 Hz, the correlation to the Lazar value is beyond astonishing. Hence, a question in everyone's mind should be, how could Lazar or his S4 colleague Barry have gotten the gravity B wave frequency value correct in 1989? Especially given that the technique to calculate it didn't exist until 2006. Even more amazingly, the Storti and Desiato technique to calculate the gravity B wave frequency is virtually unknown, even to this day. This technique is not standard physics and it is not trivially simple to follow, so just to find it in scientific literature requires a bit of effort. It is inconceivable that Bob Lazar could have discovered the Storti and Desiato technique, secretly used it, never referenced it, and then covered his tracks to produce a gravity B wave frequency value of 7.46 Hz, magically, like David Copperfield. Next, we'll add the sports model illustration appearing on the Potter page, which is hosted by Ken Wright's website. If you use your imagination a little, you can see that it's hovering above the Earth, at its surface. This representation shows two very important features. One of them is that gravity amplifiers operate at millimetre wavelengths, which is no surprise to us because we have covered this extensively in our Bob Lazar playlist. The other feature deals with the element 115 reactor and waveguide assembly. Now we'll overlay the information we've been able to derive regarding the sports model onto the illustration. As you can see, we have derived the gravity A wave fundamental frequency to be 11.24 GHz, and consequently we were able to derive the diameters of the waveguide and element 115 reactor dome, labelled as positron emitter in Potter's illustration. Hence, by deriving the waveguide and dome specifications, we have validated Potter's representation and vice versa. In addition to this, we have derived two potentially stable isotopes of element 115, that is, 258 and 296. Please note that the 296 isotope resides on the island of stability with a high probability of existence. I would like to take a moment to emphasise as strongly as possible that our entire solution appearing on screen is derived utilising a single equation, that is, the same equation. It should be obvious to all viewers that, in such a case, if the underlying equation was flawed, then the entire construct would be flawed and nothing would line up with Lazar or Potter. However, the opposite has occurred, that is, everything is lined up to perfection. Moreover, the fact that an entire solution, as appears on screen, can be constructed from a single principle, that is, a single governing equation, is nothing short of scientific erotica. Please keep in mind that our base formulation was derived from fundamental particle physics. This in itself is astonishing because the Earth is not a fundamental particle. For viewers with a scientific background, you'll understand the significance of our accomplishment and indeed our scientifically published evidence supporting our governing principle. Let's now take a closer look at the element 115 reactor and waveguide assembly. In this frame, we see two illustrations. On the left-hand side, we see the element 115 reactor and waveguide assembly as described by Potter. On the right-hand side, we see the element 115 fuel wedge manufacturing process as derived by Storti. In both illustrations, all dimensions are expressed in terms of the letter R. This means that, irrespective of the value of R, the entire solution scales proportionally. It also means that the ratio of the volume of the primary wedge to the volume of an uncut cone is the same for all values of R. Hence, this is termed the ideal volumetric ratio. Let's now have a look at what the ideal volumetric ratio buys us on a nuclear stability diagram. By enforcing the ideal volumetric ratio, whilst satisfying the Lazar primary wedge mass requirement of 223 grams, we're able to identify two potential element 115 isotope candidates. One of them resides on the beach of the island of stability, indicated by the purple circle, whilst isotope 258 is lost at sea. However, just because it's lost at sea doesn't mean that it's an impossibility. It could just mean that it occupies a place where our knowledge of nuclear physics is incomplete. Let's not forget that, prior to Edwin Hubble, standard astronomy thought that our Milky Way galaxy was the entire universe. Moreover, let's not forget that Albert Einstein, the man who bested Sir Isaac Newton, believed that the universe was static, that is, not expanding. We now know how ridiculous this idea was, and it came from Einstein, no less. Anyway, the point I'm making is that scientific history is littered with bad ideas, and the idea of isotope 258 stability being impossible may be one of them. So don't be too certain that it can't be stable, just because an incomplete diagram suggests it. We've also included a polynomial of best fit appearing as the solid red line in the illustration. This is something we had to eyeball because we don't have the actual data points for a mathematical equation. But as you can see quite intuitively, our prediction of 181 neutrons hits the target perfectly. This is very encouraging. Let's now look at how element 115 works. Here we see the depiction of a classical transverse electromagnetic plane wave. You can see that the electric field wave propagates perpendicular to the magnetic field wave. You can also see the magneto-gravitic coupling wave. This denotes a theoretical area of research applicable to normal matter only, actively investigated by scientists interested in the concept of relating electromagnetism to gravity. I should stress that the relationship between magnetism and gravity is conjecture, and nothing has been experimentally verified, only mathematically argued. However, I have included this possibility in the illustration because it applies to normal matter only and is a mainstream scientific area of research. This area of research is considered radical, but it is not fringe science. We propose that all matter radiates gravitons, and it is this graviton radiation which sustains the space-time curvature associated with general relativity. In other words, space-time curvature is not a phenomena of permanent bending, as asserted by Einstein. Rather, it is a continual feeding process whereby matter is the energy source and space-time is the energy sink, or to use better terminology, the quantum vacuum is the energy sink. So, eventually, all matter completely evaporates as the fuel supply is exhausted. I should point out that this idea is a requirement of the conformal cyclic cosmology model developed by Sir Roger Penrose, the Nobel laureate. If you have not watched episodes 34 and 35, I would highly recommend that you do so. In these episodes, we establish that, in the case of a charged particle, its electrostatic spectrum is 90 degrees out of phase with its gravitational spectrum, or in other words, its electric field is 90 degrees out of phase with its gravitational field. This is important because the nucleus of all atoms possess a net positive charge due to the presence of protons. Thus, the same explanation for the nucleus of atoms applies. That is, its electric field is 90 degrees out of phase with its gravitational field. However, specifically in the case of element 115, we propose that the geometry of the nucleus produces a 0-degree phase difference between the electric and gravitational fields. It is this alignment which facilitates the amplification of the gravity A wave signal and makes Lazar's claims possible. In this illustration, you can also see the electrogravitic coupling wave. This denotes a propagating effect which inhibits the absorption and emission of gravitons into and out of the dark reservoir of quantum potential energy. Remember, we have defined one graviton as an entangled pair of conjugate photons. That is, the specific geometry of the element 115 nucleus generates a gravity A wave signal which inhibits the particle creation annihilation process associated with the zero-point field. In the simplest possible terms, element 115 inhibits the Casimir effect. Let's now look at the element 115 fuel cone and cylinder. This is an illustration developed by Ken Wright, and you can find it on his website. It describes the element 115 wedge manufacturing process in 4 simple steps. Step 1 involves stacking multiple discs, one upon the other. Step 2 involves fusing that stack of discs into a cylinder. Step 3 involves milling the cylinder into a cone, and Step 4 involves slicing a fuel wedge from the cone. If you're observant enough, you'll see that Ken Wright depicts 12 discs. However, we assert that the actual solution involves 16 discs. In fact, we show in episode 59 that, whether or not an illustration depicts 12 or 16 discs doesn't really matter too much. Having said this, our solution involves 16 discs, so we'll stick to that. Okay, now that we've depicted the simplified process, let's do a deep dive into the complete process. Firstly, I need to point out that the Ken Wright wedge manufacturing process you've just seen is more precisely termed the primary wedge manufacturing process. That is to say, Ken Wright only describes the manufacturing of a single element 115 fuel wedge. In reality, many more can be manufactured from the same cone/cylinder. In fact, a total of 8 element 115 fuel wedges, including the primary wedge, can be manufactured from a single cone/cylinder. The dashed lines on the illustration denote slicing planes. The cone is sliced along the dashed lines indicated. Then the opposing sections are mated together to form a secondary wedge. So, section 2 mates with section 2', section 3 mates with section 3', and so on. The angle associated with each slice is displayed in the table. It may be a bit difficult to see, but we've inserted a small red dot in section 8. This indicates the slicing angle associated with this piece. Of course, the rest of the angle values in the table are applied in the same manner. You will have also seen that 2/3 of the volume of the cylinder is milled material. That is, 2/3 of the cylinder is removed. The shavings are collected, smelted and reprocessed into new element 115 discs. This means that manufacturing 5 cylinders of element 115 fuel material produces no waste for an ideal solution. Or in other words, 80 element 115 discs produces 5 cones, which in turn produces 40 fuel wedges, with no material being lost, provided of course that you're able to continue manufacturing element 115 fuel wedges in batches of 5 cones. Anyway, getting back to the 40 element 115 fuel wedges I mentioned a moment ago. If we assume a minimum working lifetime average of 20 years per fuel wedge, as per Lazar's suggestion, then 40 fuel wedges is enough to power 40 sports models for at least 20 years, or one sports model for at least 800 years. Moreover, if the alleged stockpile of 500 pounds is true, that's 227 kilograms, then enough element 115 material exists for a fleet of approximately 550 sports models. Building a military force from this potential stockpile isn't viable because as soon as you lose one vehicle in a combat situation, you'd have no way to replace it. The next thing I wish to emphasise is that after more than 30 years of commercial engineering experience across multiple industrial sectors, I can recognise a man-made solution. To my eye, it is clear and obvious that the Element 115 fuel wedge manufacturing process is completely terrestrial and there is nothing extraterrestrial about it. In other words, this process was not conceived by space aliens, it was conceived by men, probably as a consequence of the LA 1000 story recounted by Bob Lazar. I can only speculate, but this solution was probably compiled by someone from the Los Alamos National Laboratory. Let me put it to you another way. It took me decades to develop the electrogravity-magnetic construct, which explains the sports model and validates Lazar's story. By contrast, it took me one day to figure out the solution to the Element 115 manufacturing process. This in itself tells me that the Element 115 manufacturing process was conceived by men, not by Martians. Any first-year mechanical engineering student could be given the Element 115 fuel wedge manufacturing process as an assignment, with the objective of the assignment being to maximise material utilisation and reduce material wastage to zero, if possible. Let's now summarise what we've covered. Tabulating the totality of our analysis emphasises the fact that we have derived exact solutions for the Element 115 gravity A wave, fuel, reactor and waveguide, all expressed in terms of a single parameter R. This is an astonishing achievement. Equally astonishingly, our electrogravity magnetic construct validates Lazar's gravity B wave claim as discussed in a previous slide. Our investigation supports the conclusions derived in previous episodes, that is, a stable isotope of element 115 is likely to exist on the beach of the island of stability with an atomic weight of 296. Hence, we're left with two possible candidate solutions, as appears in the table. Isotope 258 cannot be conclusively excluded from possibility because it might occupy a place where our knowledge of nuclear physics is incomplete. Therefore, isotope 258 denotes the ideal solution. In actuality, it represents the clever solution because the machining process does not produce any waste material. However, it sits outside our current understanding of physics. Isotope 296 denotes a theoretical scientific solution residing on the island of stability, but produces waste material resulting from the machining process. In the simplest possible terms, we have solved many of the Lazar mysteries associated with the sports model, the most emphatic of which will be the existence of a stable element 115 isotope when it is eventually synthesized in the fullness of time. When this occurs, the Holocaust deniers will double down on their criticism of the Lazar story, re-employing their typical tactics of character assassination, as if they are presenting a summary argument. We stress that the contents of this episode are purely conjecture. The conclusions presented may be incorrect, so viewer discretion is advised.